We're here to solve the Slitherlink cipher by Matej that's also solvable as a no-4 in a row grid. It has only 2 letters, and those appear to have 4 digits as options, but some of these patterns, like these 3 cells in event triomino, as well as these 3 cells in event triomino, can't be 3s, so the digit 3 is quickly ruled out for both letters. And then these 3 x's surround this O, so if these x's were a 0, we couldn't get to this numbered loop clue. The same way, if these O's were 0, we couldn't get to this X. So 0 is also eliminated here, and so this grid's just going to have 1s and 2s. And you can certainly go through this grid by guessing which is 1 and 2, just trying the 2 options. But another thing you can think about is just the parity of these cells. And I'll do that for a bit. One thing to know around corners, if this is a 2, you're always going to be taking these edges. If this is a 1, then you don't use these edges, but around this clue, this X is now effectively in a corner. So in one scenario, the one which is 2 with 1, you build a pattern like this. In the other option where this is 1 with 2, you still build a pattern like this. So around any of these clues that is off of an OX on a corner, there's this line segment, there's this line segment. Up on this XO, there's this line segment. Over here, there's this line segment. So these are true regardless if it's a 1 or a 2. Doing even more around that, we saw that a fair amount of communication around these corners is still happening. So if this is a 2, again, remember this edge and this edge are taken. And if this is not a 2, if O is instead of 1, then we can't take this edge regardless, and this edge is still taken. So this edge is always taken. In one scenario, we have to bend near it. In the other scenario, we don't. So there's like this path and this path, but they never take these 2 edges around the X. This edge is never used in those paths, so we're still kind of in this quantum world of knowing X or O are 1 and 2 or 2 and 1, but these are sure truths in both of those scenarios. There's something that's starting to now form, though, around the count of these sections that's going to really be key. And that's reflecting that if O is already 1, we've got a dead join here. If O is 1, we can't ever come into the space and still come down here. We have an invalid count of parity for these ends. So O has to be 2 from having marked all the rest of this grid now in the lower left corner. And I'm just marking in these cells, and just, I guess, for visual sake, I'll mark in the X's. You can probably keep enough of this in your head to do the work. But we'll get this going. Coming back to the core loop ends, we've got to come around this 2 in this way. This 2 in the corner is going to have to come up and over in this way. These ends can't be used, so this has to come in. This 2 is now effectively in a corner, so it's going to have to come up here and have 1 cell this way. This end through the 2 is going to have 1 cell coming through here, so we can't take this side or this side of that 1. Up in this upper left corner, we've got to take one of these ends, which will close off one of these. That's now going to put this end having to travel into the side of the grid. This 2, we can take this edge or this edge, but we always take this edge. And this is now where this 2 is effectively a corner through this, so we can't take this end. If we did take this end, we couldn't get 2 around this. So this will have to corner around this clue. It corners to here and gets like so. But if we actually complete this 2, we see that this 2 requires taking the inner turn, and this is now the outer cornering, but that gets completed. Come up and take this 1. This 2, now still around a corner, needs to take this path, which means this comes up and this comes over, so this is okay as a starting point. Some of this is now going to be resolved by working through how this corner communicates, but let's take this 1 that's now finished, which marks off this. This 1 is going to take one of these edges, which means one of these edges is used, so these aren't used. That now means this 2 doesn't have any options except to come down here. Marking that in, we get these cells. This 2 has 3 options, but notice if it just took this path, it now is finished on the left side and can't use this, so we'll always have to come across the top. In doing that, we get this completion here. The 1 is going to need to take these cells. That finishes out this 2, moves this up. For this loop to stay connected, these have to come across. Last option for these cells, that puts this all in the grid. This 1 up here can't take these ends because of the loop end coming in. That means these aren't used, so this 1 actually is now finished effectively. This 1 always has to take some cell here because of these ends being used, so this is also now effectively finished. Puts in this 2, completes this top, marks this coming down. This loop end has to come across, and this again to just avoid closing on itself. This 2 is forced to do this, and again to avoid closing. It's got to do this to finish the grid. So a compact and interesting Slitherlink Cipher puzzle. It had a kind of one or two moment in the middle where you had an either or to work through, and whether you just tried those out or identified some shared link sections or absent link sections that are used by both options, you would get to the actual identification of O and X, and then sort of some good parity use around the grid, particularly if you were seeing how it's flowing in from like the corner of a 2 to the opposite corner of a 2, and then that would influence the 1s and mark off edges you can't take. Some of those things through myself are probably a bit subtle, but if you rewatch the video, hopefully you can see that communication through diagonals and how it's used in Slitherlink in general. So thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.